today I'm here with Paul Deakin, who is the choir director at the Russian Catholic Church in St Kilda, Balaclava sort of area.
In Calendar East.
Wonderful. I drive past it every day, but you never know. And we're gonna be chatting today, Paul, about the recent change, the decision of Bishop Mykola to change the Ukraine Catholic Church calendar in Australia from Julian to Gregorian. So I was wondering, what is the difference between the Julian and Gregorian calendars?
So it's at the most fundamental level. It's a difference in um, the number of leap years that you have over the course of centuries. Um, the the Earth doesn't rotate around the sun in an exact number of days, which is why we have to have leap years to correct when um, the um, the calendar starts to move. So we add in leap years every 4 years. This is something that both calendars do, but the the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar are two uh, methods of adjusting leap years over the course of centuries. And the Julian calendar goes back to um, uh, ancient times. It was invented in Alexandria in uh, around about the time of Christ, and the uh, Gregorian calendar was devised in the 16th century um, and adopted first by the papacy. And the Gregorian calendar is quite a bit more accurate. So there is at present a difference of 13 days between the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar.
Okay, so it's quite mathematical then. It's basically the difference between ancient maths and 16th century maths. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah,
Cool.
basically.
All right. I guess I'm wondering because obviously the Byzantine Catholic Church is different to the Byzantine Orthodox Church, and there is a distinction.
Yeah.
Why have the Byzantine Catholics followed the Julian calendar for so long?
Well, there are many different uh, kinds of Byzantine Catholic churches that are all within the umbrella of the general Catholic Church that follow the Byzantine Rite. Um, the Ukrainian Catholic Church is one of the largest Byzantine Catholic churches, which is why their decision on this is so significant. Um, there are other churches, Byzantine Catholic churches, such as the Melkites, for example, which have long ago switched to the Gregorian calendar. So um, they've, I think, many Byzantine Catholic churches have adhered to the Julian calendar um, as as partly out of attachment to their traditions, and partly as a symbol of ecumenism. Um, the fact that they want to express a bond between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, and Eastern Catholic churches, whether Byzantine or other churches, are a very uh, tangible expression of ecumenism. So I think those are some of the reasons.
Okay, so it's a bit like how the Ordinariate Church follows the older calendar pre-62 in a way, because that's more similar to what the High Anglican Church follows. It's pretty close to what the High Anglican Church follows. So that's interesting. Ecumenical reasons are. So recently, Archpriest Simon has been reported as saying that the change will be difficult and emotional. I actually think his full statement was that the change would be difficult and emotional for some. Why would you suppose that he would say that?
I think because traditions, which the calendar is a very embedded tradition, has a lot of very strong emotional attachments. People, if people are used to celebrating the Christmas, for instance, on 13 days after the Western celebration, that can sort of take on a significance. It can be a reaffirmation of the Byzantine tradition, for example, and it can be, I think, for a lot of people I know who follow the Julian calendar, they love the fact that it's the Christmas in particular is different to the Western Christmas, which often feels, I think, for people of faith generally, no matter what calendar they're on, I think it feels very commercial. So they can be people who follow the Julian calendar can be glad that they can escape some of the commercialism.
Fair enough. It made me think about something that was said in my workplace today. I was talking about the change of the calendar, and one of my work colleagues said, "Oh, so you mean to say they won't be getting cheaper Easter eggs now?"
Yes.
So I guess that would make some people give them a sense of difficulty and emotional reactions. Cheap chocolate is a very nice thing.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. I was doing a bit of reading today, and in 1923, it appears that the Orthodox churches adopted a hybrid calendar called the Revised Julian Calendar. Why do you think the Ukrainian Catholic Church has opted to go fully for the Gregorian calendar and not for this revised Julian calendar instead?
So the revised Julian calendar is, I mean, not to get too far into the astronomy, but it's the revised Julian calendar is actually a slightly different method of calculating the leap years. When the Greek Orthodox adopted the revised Julian calendar in 1923, some astronomers were talking to them and said, well, you know, the Gregorian calendar is a little bit more accurate, but it's possible to be even more accurate. And so they adopted the revised Julian calendar, which includes rules that in a few hundred years will actually mean that the revised Julian calendar is actually on a separate date from the Gregorian, which is, if you ask me, is piling confusion on confusion.
It certainly sounds confusing to us Western Catholics over here.
Yeah. It's also worth saying that it was only the Greek Orthodox Church and the Patriarchate of Constantinople that changed to the revised Julian. The Slavic Orthodox churches are still on the old Julian calendar.
Okay. So it seems that this change has come about possibly motivated by the Russian invasion into Ukraine. Given this, do you think the Russian Catholic Church will also follow with this change?
Well, the Russian Catholic Church doesn't make these decisions as a whole, because the Russian Catholic Church is at present without a hierarch. So it's up to individual parishes to make those decisions. I think down the road it might well encourage a lot of Russian Catholic parishes to switch to the Gregorian calendar. A lot of Russian Catholic parishes in the United States, for instance, have already switched.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible that just as a symbol of the oneness of the church, which is what I think is really at stake.
Mm-hmm.
They might choose to follow the Gregorian calendar. But when you're talking about a symbol of the oneness of the church, do you want to emphasize the oneness of the Catholic Church, or do you want to emphasize the oneness of the broader church, which includes the Orthodox churches? Because there is although the schism that separates us is there, the schism is not total.
Mm-hmm.
They're still part of the church. The Eastern Orthodox are still part of the Church of Christ, and the Julian calendar is one way of emphasizing that. So it depends, I think, on what particular communities feel is worth emphasizing.
Sure. All right. And so, as we start to get towards the end of this interview, I'd like to ask you some questions about your own faith journey, Paul, because I find your story quite interesting. Paul and I met through the Latin Church, and obviously you've grown up in Australia, where it's predominantly Latin Church, so I'm wondering, what does it mean to you to be a Russian Catholic? Why do you go to the Russian Catholic Church?
Well, I first went to the Russian Catholic Church in St. Kilda when I was about 7 years ago.
And how did you come across that?
Well, it was I was keen to go to a Byzantine liturgy of some sort, because I had fallen in love with icons, and it was actually a friend of mine who suggested going along, and so we went along for Vespers initially, and I just fell in love with the with the icons, and with the liturgy, and then with the community as I met them. It's a very it's a way of praying that I find deeply, or very, very intimate, and it's a spirituality where I think there seems to be no contradiction between the majesty of God and the intimacy of God coming to meet us personally, which and as soon as I noticed that, I thought, this is where I want to be. This is where God is calling me to be. There's something special here that I would like to be part of and to nurture.
Sure, of course. Very beautiful the way that you've put that, and then obviously now you're in music ministry, and like, what other projects do you have coming up in your ministry in the Russian Catholic Church?
Well, there's the Global Russian Catholic Congress, which is coming up in June, which we're preparing for currently. And I've been asked to put together the music for the liturgy and for the Vespers that will be said at the Congress. So that's taking a bit of my time. There's also the usual Holy Week services, which are I think for any church musician,
they are mammoth, but they're extra mammoth.
Big deal, yeah.
Divine liturgies can, to some people, seemingly go forever. But
well,
the music is very beautiful and powerful.
And entering part of the eternity of God, I think.
Yeah, so in a very literal sense to some people, and in a very spiritual sense to others, I'm sure. So you know, a bit of a hard question. But do you see the Russian Catholic Church being hit quite hard by this war?
It is. Yes, and in some ways yes, and in some ways it's too soon to tell. The ways in which it has been hit are to do with the sort of links that are being forged between Russian Catholic communities worldwide as part of nurturing the consciousness of the Russian Catholic Church as a global community. So the latest news, for instance, which we've had, are that the Russian Catholic priests in Russia who wanted to attend Global Congress in the Czech Republic won't be able to get visas.
Oh, wow.
to the Czech Republic, and so won't be able to attend, which is a big blow, considering that the goal of this is to make connections between parishes all over the world that normally don't meet and see each other. So that's very tangible. It also has to be said that even though we recognize, we in Australia recognize the war as a terrible crime against Ukraine and against the international law, a lot of the Russian public don't see it like that, and that is the result of state propaganda that's been fed to them for years, and some of our Russian Catholic communities don't support the war to some degree, and it's very very difficult, I think, to because the war in Ukraine is such a dominant topic of conversation, to speaking to people who get radically different news sources and end up taking what we would regard as quite an objectionable political stance. So that damages the Russian Catholic Church worldwide.
Has it done damage to the Russian Catholic Church in Australia, would you say? Is there...
No.
No, okay.
No. The Russian Catholic community in Melbourne, which is the only one in Australia, there isn't anybody in the community who is outspoken in their support for Putin.
Yes. I guess what I'm saying is, do you cop any sort of resistance when other people ask you, why would you go and worship at the Russians? For example, some people are being told that they can no longer listen to Tchaikovsky, for example, because that would be supporting Russia. Is there any of that happening to your community at all, or are you relatively safe for now? I pray that you
are. There have been reactions that I've encountered that have been a little bit reserved, maybe. Mm-hmm. We thought that it was prudent not to put up the sign advertising Russian Christmas in big letters right out the front this year. So it's we're keeping our heads down a little bit, but I mean, as a general rule, we're Russian Catholics, and that doesn't mean supporting the Russian government. And as in general, if anybody says anything that implies that we support the Russian government, we're happy to correct them.
Fantastic. How might we best pray for all Byzantine Catholics this Easter?
Well, please pray for an end to the war in Ukraine, because that is really tearing Eastern Europe apart. And please pray for the unity of the Church, the unity of everybody who is in communion with Rome, and also the unity of the broader Church worldwide that includes our Orthodox brothers and sisters, because the schisms that divide us and the politics that motivates our animosities seem severe, but